And so they're all having this conversation, and then all of a sudden the octopus goes, "You just got a pop and lock."
Fantastic.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's brilliant.
Good
You
morning.
said you weren't a jokey person. That's amazing.
Yeah, nice.
Good morning,
Nice.
good afternoon, and good day from wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Download Pop-Up Edition, the DD for those in the know. I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results and a proud DLA partner, and I will be your guest host this week. We're going to try something new again today. With this topics that came to mind, I'm going to share with you some brief research I've been working on this week to provide us a common foundation for the discussion. The topic for this week is ecosystems, and it came up because I'm reminded of Arlo Guthrie's Alice's Restaurant. When you hear something 3 times, it's a movement. And I've heard about ecosystems 3 times in the past few days and said, what do you mean? So I did some research. I'm bringing it here today to form the foundation of what we're going to talk about. And when it comes to the discussion, I'm pretty sure you're going to like it. What we want to do is make this as inclusive as possible. We want to hear from you. Please add your questions and your thoughts in the chat throughout the discussion. And there's still time to ping a friend and have them join the discussion too.
Good idea.
Go ahead. Ping them. We'll wait.
Do it now.
Yeah, we're waiting. All right. I guess you'll just have to multitask while we cover introductions.
Sorry, that's
By now, many of you know the regulars on this panel, being regulars yourself. So I say, hi, William. Good to see you. Let's see. Who else do we have in the audience? I'm going to try. There we go. Hey, welcome. All right.
And we have Andrew as well.
Hello, Andrew, welcome. He was probably busy pinging a friend to join us. Let's start off by going around the horn with some quick introductions. Tim, you want to kick us off, please?
Yes, I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. And I'm Fridays always excite me because the digital download, you never know what's going to happen. It's a bit like Spike Milligan, a business type of Spike Milligan, really. You just don't know what's going to happen.
Excellent. Thank you. Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam. I'm Tim's business partner and co-founder of DLA Ignite. And it's become a real kind of lovely way to round out the week for me. You know, these lives when we have, it's great to see everybody spread around the world. And it's great to interact with the audience that comes along and the regulars and new people that come along. And it's always as much of a learning as anything else, I think.
Awesome. Tracy.
Hey, everybody. I am Tracy Borison. I'm over in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And my business is TLB Coaching and Events. We are a proud partner of DLA Ignite and Crux, bringing all the greatness to Canada, which I'm very excited about. And I also love these times on Fridays. Specifically for me, I've been dealing with some COVID in my house this week. I do not have it, but my son and my husband both have it. So Nicholas probably not making an appearance today.
But that's why we invite
it's always
you.
such. I know. You guys really just want to see Nicholas, not me. I'm the same, so it's fine. But yeah, I feel like it's just a really cool place to explore ideas and explore concepts, especially like you mentioned, Rob, these types of things that we hear a lot about, but maybe we don't know what they mean to us, and we get an opportunity to explore that together, which I think is fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's us. Now for something completely different. As I said earlier, I'm going to share with you some brief research I've been working on this week to provide us a common foundation for today's discussion. First of all, let's get on the same page. What is meant by a business ecosystem? What I found was, like so many business terms out there, for each resource you review, the definition varies and sometimes significantly. So I'm going to share a slide with you. Now, before you say, oh, on a Friday afternoon in the middle of
On a Friday
summer,
afternoon.
you're going to kill us with death by PowerPoint, relax. It's one slide, a picture, really. And I'm hoping it will clarify what we're talking about when we say business ecosystems. Because I know when I started down this rabbit hole earlier in the week, I quickly got lost. So let me share a definition that I found helpful. According to Wall Street Mojo, a business ecosystem is an ecosystem where the main players facilitate an economic community by utilizing the resources in the habitat. The prime resources are raw materials and technology. The main players are producers, suppliers, consumers, competitors, and government agencies. These organisms in the ecosystem interact, producing goods and services.
Mm.
Clear as mud, right?
Mm.
A lot of jargon in there, a lot of dense words. Additional research provided me some examples from Amazon to Uber. The resource most helpful to me was the graphic of Airbnb shown here on the right. As you can see, Airbnb is at the center of this ecosystem. Now, I always thought of Airbnb and the others called out here as marketplaces,
Yeah.
a middleman bringing two different parties together for commerce, buyers and sellers, like travelers and room hosts. But Airbnb, like so many other marketplace apps, has become much more than that. In the lower right corner of this graphic, you will see that there are the buyers, the users who have come to rely on Airbnb for servicing their needs, like business travelers, weekend travelers, vacationers, and experience seekers. Towards the top center, there are suppliers who have built their entire business model around the Airbnb ecosystem, from simple room hosts to construction and development companies building houses with this app in mind. And then we have the tangential businesses who are part of the ecosystem. And even if they don't use the app personally, we have your conference organizers and cleaning companies and all sorts of others. So as you can see, this ecosystem is now more than just an app. That's the foundation. Let me open it up to this group for our first question. In your opinion, how does an ecosystem compare to some of the previous discussions we've had around audience and community?
I can go. It's funny because when I was thinking about this concept, I was thinking about the conversation that we had about community and what's the difference between an ecosystem and a community. I think it's somewhat easy to see that audience is one of the pieces of an ecosystem, one of the pieces of a community. So that kind of puts audience in a different category. But the thing that I kept thinking about was, I think it comes back to how we treat the people that are surrounding us, right? We can treat people like an audience. We can treat people like a prospect. We can treat people like a partner. We can treat people like a vendor. And a lot of times those relationships become transactional. And when we start to look at things as if they're part of a whole, like the ecosystem of the earth, right? We don't exist here. humans might disagree with this, but we don't exist here unless all these other things exist here. We interact with each other even when we're not really noticing that we're interacting with each other. That's the ecosystem. And so it's important to know that these connections exist even if we're not, one, taking them into consideration every day, and two, optimizing them to make them feel a certain way. So I think the concept of community is about treating people as if they're a part of something instead of just being like, okay, you're my vendor for paper towels, right? Like, I get paper towels from you and you give me a good price and that's our relationship. But there could be more to that relationship if you treated it like that person was part of a community, that they were a critical part of your ecosystem, that if for whatever reason that paper towel person disappeared, that would impact you in some way. And maybe the paper towels aren't really the thing, but the people are the thing, right? Like, who's that person who sells you the paper towels? Who's that person in their accounting department who makes it easy for you when something billing goes wrong, right? When we treat people like they're a valuable part of our, you want to call it network. I read a definition about ecosystems, about how it's an interconnected system, a network, right? Like, whatever word you choose to use, when we treat people as if they have value in that and they're not just a cog in a machine that can be changed out, or like a battery. I'm just thinking because like our remote on our TV died yesterday. So we just changed out the batteries, right? Like, those old batteries mean nothing to us. But people, when we treat people like batteries, that's when we get into just like,
But
these are our vendors.
Doesn't the ecosystem absolutely reduce all of the component parts to commodities? So if you think about the example that you had, Airbnb, they have customers, have loads of customers, and Airbnb form a hub. So if you're a property owner, you get to monetize in a hassle-free way your property, for which you pay quite a lot of money to Airbnb to be able to do that. Airbnb then provide a series of bolt-on services to take more and more of your money for doing so. So banking services, cleaning services, advertising services, yada, 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 all of these different things. And I'm not picking on Airbnb, because exactly the same thing is true of Uber. Exactly the same thing is true of Amazon. Exactly the same thing is true of Apple. True of all of these things. What those ecosystems that were highlighted on that list that you provided, Rob, are all ecosystems that have become ubiquitous in their particular niche. And that's given them almost a kind of dictatorship within that environment. So if you want a distribution engine for the products that you manufacture, or the products that you import, you can go to anywhere you like. But if you want to do it properly, in terms of getting the maximum reach, you'll go to Amazon. You can go to cottages.com to rent your cottage, but actually, if you want a true global reach, you'll go to Airbnb. You can run your own minicab company if you want, but if you want a unique service offer with the map which shows where somebody is at any particular moment, again, you have to go to Uber to achieve that. So I think that actually the objective in a lot of these ecosystems is to reduce all of the things around that central hub to their minimum viable interchangeable nature. So, choose you don't want to go to Airbnb anymore, they don't care, because you're one of a million customers a week that books through them. The same with Uber, the same with Amazon. And because these organizations have become so powerful, and the idea of it being a distributed community is absolutely not the case anymore. What you've got is a fascist dictatorship, effectively. And all of these people are completely under the control. If Amazon decide that they're not going to pay you, I mean, it's hard enough to get to speak to anybody if you're an Amazon customer, let alone an Amazon supplier. And the same is true, I'm sure, of Airbnb and Uber and all of the other organizations. So there you are. That's the flip side of your view of it. And I'm not saying I necessarily subscribe to the view that I just said. I'm just saying it's one way of viewing this, because they have become all powerful in their verticals, haven't they? These organizations.
But okay, putting Airbnb and Amazon aside, if you were starting or trying to create an ecosystem, doesn't mean that you're powerful. What we're saying here is that is there a difference between, say, community, which we talk about a lot, and an ecosystem? Community being got from what I generally from what I would see is about people, whereas an ecosystem I generally see is about organizations and their cooperation with each other.
Mm.
And like any company, you can decide whether you do business with somebody or not. And I just see that there's I thought it was a great slide, Rob. I thought it was a great visual interpretation of the fact that actually, when you think about an organization and you're paying somebody, regardless of who it is, that when you pay somebody, that has an impact, because they're going to go home and put that money on the table, and that's going to feed the dog and the cat and the two children and grandma and stuff. So there's just that interlinking going on with all the other suppliers. The paper towels is a great example, Tracy, where you go to the restroom, I think you call it, and there's no paper towels. What are you going to do?
I think
wipe your hands on your pants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't. Pants mean something else to me, but yes, I know what you mean.
William's comment, I think, does a great job of summarizing it as well. The ecosystem brings in an explicit sense of, he uses the term interdependence. I think of the term commerce, whereas this is looser in the sense of community. In a sense of community, we may even have similar commercial drives, but we don't get together as a community to necessarily feed that commercial drive at that moment. Whereas within this ecosystem, I don't think any of the participants on that slide, the room hosts or the cleaning companies or anyone else, would be part of this intent seems to be at the center of the ecosystem versus community for me.
Will's also made this interesting comment as well. Just give you a couple of seconds to read it.
I think it's just one of the things I keep thinking, which is why, like, when we pick a word and we have a conversation about it, is that there's like so many different definitions of ecosystem. So if we're talking about a business ecosystem, then I think by nature, our brains connect it to commerce, right? Because there's money flowing through the ecosystem. But if you think about the natural ecosystem, like the birds that land on the rhinos and eat the bugs so they keep that rhinos healthy, right? Like that is interdependence, but it's not connected to commerce. I think when you look at communities, depending on how people run their communities, but based on how I run my community, there is an interdependence that is related there. And if people don't feel the two-way contribution, then they're not really a part of the community. But I think even then, when you look at the ecosystem, there's probably people who are part of an ecosystem who don't feel like they're part of an ecosystem. So that concept of belonging doesn't exist. And so it's really a matter of like, how do you want to bring all of these things together, right? Like, what do you want in your definition? What does an ecosystem look like for you? And not just an ecosystem to have an ecosystem, but an ecosystem that feels like it's a good, like if I was Tracy Borison at the middle of that web of Airbnb, but how do I feel about how that ecosystem exists? One of the things that I've had when I was in my corporate career, I had a boss who just was like, you need to get better at negotiations because you just, In her opinion, I was not a good negotiator. In my definition, I created fair trade. Right? So this is a service that you provide me. I think that this is fair value, so I'm going to give you fair value. Her opinion was that we should always get it for as little as possible. And just the way I am as a human is I like to exchange fair value. And so my ecosystem looks a lot different than her ecosystem. There's commerce related. I like to treat all my people like a community. So really all these ideas start to become intertwined if you want them to be intertwined, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting that from the buyer's perspective, the ecosystem often provides a huge amount of value because there's a single point of contact. So you go to Airbnb, you make one booking, one payment, one place, and all of the ancillaries are sorted out. And the same at Amazon. You don't worry about where it's being shipped from, or the guarantee, or who your point of contact, who your payment is with. All of that's handled centrally by one place. From the seller's perspective, so the host or the stock provider for Amazon, the advantage is that you get access to a big market and you get a series of bolt-ons to your product, so you don't have to do all of those things yourself. You don't have to worry about distribution or cleaning or merchant fees or whatever it might be. But it does. I think a lot of organizations, particularly young organizations, go into the idea of being part of an ecosystem believing that the niche they've carved out for themselves is going to be their niche forever. I think that one of the things that we see time and again is that the people that are in the driving seat, i.e. that hub, whether or not you see it as a marketplace or an ecosystem, they see every single component as a commodity. So, I can get a better deal going to this merchant, so I will. Apple, although I'm a big Apple fanboy, they wanted to buy Dropbox. And Dropbox said, we're not for sale. So Apple said, okay, well, we'll go and build our own thing then. And they did. And that's free and with every Apple product that you buy. And this idea that you'll either do it our way or will effectively pull the rug from under you, I think is a very dangerous thing for businesses, because inevitably, you've got a great relationship with this company that's providing you a huge amount of, or this ecosystem that's providing you a huge amount of revenue. And often there isn't a plan B. Often there can't be a plan B. If you're
So Andrew's come up with an interesting definition, which was and Common and Will said that, and Lenwood, who normally would be here, his definition is that ecosystems are made up of communities and evolved in value creation for everybody in the ecosystem.
So moving on to the next question, how is an ecosystem different from a social media platform? Or is it? After all, one of the examples given of an ecosystem is Facebook.
I think you can treat a social media platform like an ecosystem, or you can't. This is the thing I think about the digital space is, I used this example once, as if you have a trade show space, right? You rent out a conference room. Conference room is plain, right? It's got 4 walls, got some chairs, it's got some tables. In order to make it the space, in order to make it a Mexican fiesta, you need to add some sombreros and some guacamole and some fun music, mariachi band, right? You need to add something to that. You need to have an intention to make it something. And so Facebook, by nature, it's a platform. People are using it. There's a lot of different people using Facebook for a lot of different ways. There's a lot of people who prefer LinkedIn to Facebook or Instagram or choose TikTok, which I know nothing about. But people like to go where they feel, where they feel good, right? And I don't hang out on Facebook anymore because it got too competitive and salesy, and it felt bad. That wasn't the type of ecosystem I wanted to hang out in. So it can be an ecosystem, but I think there's an equal amount of people who are not treating it like an ecosystem. And we also have to keep that in mind, because although I might be treating it as my main business ecosystem, not everybody there is treating it like a business ecosystem. They might be treating it like a family photos ecosystem or something
I
different.
think the really interesting point about Facebook is, though, that they absolutely are a prime example of what I described. And actually, you as the customer are actually not the customer; you are the commodity. And I think that they basically hawk you around to anybody that will pay to get access to you as an individual and your particular micro demographic, in order that we're looking for mums in their late 20s. Do you see what I did there, Tracy? Looking for mums in their late 20s who live in Alberta. And that's who we're targeting with this particular product. So they get a list of people, and sure enough, the ad shows up for you, and you go, okay, that's a really targeted ad. So that's the Facebook business model. And I think that the other ecosystem bits, I've sold things on Facebook Marketplace. There's no charge for doing so, which is much less of an ecosystem, much more of a community, isn't it? Because I could equally post, I've got a guitar to sell. I could post a picture of it on LinkedIn and say, here you are, it's $1,000. And, which is the community element of that. So it's interesting that in some ways, Facebook seem to have that very nailed down. And in other ways, they're almost rather potentially naive, aren't they? Because, in terms of a marketplace, it's immeasurably bigger than eBay. There's 2 billion people on Facebook. There aren't 2 billion accounts on eBay.
I think it's one of the things
Sorry,
that Facebook has struggled with, isn't it? Is that they got people to sign up. There were these things called groups, and then a lot of the things they then copied off people. They checking into places was a copy of, I can't remember what the social network.
Oh yeah,
Foursquare.
Foursquare.
They copied
Code
Foursquare,
rage.
and then they copied, and they copied then they made their user interface more, and more whatever it was, more Twitterish at the time, and then they're making it more TikTok at the time. So I don't necessarily see Facebook is innovating. They're more copying, but if you think about Facebook, there are groups that people go to, and they get value from those groups. And there may be groups that you haven't been, that you don't see value in Facebook, as you say that you don't, Tracy. I mean, I'm in 2 groups, right, which I get an awful lot of value from, which is what I tend to use Facebook for. And I think that there's that difference between what we're doing there ultimately is there's commerce, because what we're doing is in both of those groups we help each other. It's a sharing of information and a sharing of a common passion. Adam is in loads of guitar Facebook groups, and again, that's an information sharing. And whether you stand on the side or whether you're in there actually sharing information, and that may be commerce, there may not be.
And
there's commerce. It might not be between Adam and a member of the group, but in between those posts are ads.
There are, and I mean that's the way that Facebook has always had its business model. I mean, in China, the product there, I can't remember what it is far more advanced, but it uses WeChat, yeah, and it uses a credit card as the center point rather than advertising. So it's just the way that they built it, and therefore for them to go to the stock market and show that they're getting increasing revenues because of user numbers from a social media point of view. If you take Simon Kemp's data, not my opinion, is basically leveling off at about 60% of the world's population. The only way that they can grow revenues is to show more ads, but that's their business model. If you don't like it, don't go there. The same as, if you don't like the salespeople in whatever shop you do, you don't go there. So, but I think that the ecosystems have been of LinkedIn and Twitter, they still haven't kind of grasped that concept, because there are a couple of groups on LinkedIn, but groups, it isn't something that people have really grasp because they don't know how to run them. They think they're a way of selling shit, and they're not.
But and I'm going to use a word which is not a very nice word, but I mean it in its a biological meaning here. So Tim and I worked for Oracle. Oracle had a very active partner ecosystem, but the reality is that the partner ecosystem, they were parasites following along after the big Leviathan. So Oracle creates this software. Oracle doesn't implement the software, but it creates the software. The partners implement it, and they bring in all of the different consulting services that they need to make the implementation successful. So that's a very clear, and I suspect a very well established and advanced ecosystem, because Oracle doesn't advise on the implementation of these things. It builds the products and says, here's the marketplace of products, the customers we sell to, then that we open the doors to the partners to go in and actually make this work. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is that everybody is very clear about what the value exchange is at each point on that. And I think that in a lot of these less well-established, much younger things like Airbnb and Uber, it's still rather like the Wild West, and I can't help feeling that very large organizations that operate in these quite immature ecosystems, there is this sense that like the big supermarkets do in the UK, which is we will form a relationship with you as a supplier of, could be toilet rolls or it could be strawberries, it doesn't matter, and we'll buy more and more and more and more and more of your production at the price that you set until we've bought all of your production. And then we'll keep buying all of your production until you've got no relationships with anyone except us. And then we'll wind the price down and down and down and down and down until you don't make any money at all on this and are just doing it in order to exist. And I think that we don't see that in the Oracle type ecosystem, but we do see it in a lot of these very young ecosystems, because people go in assuming that it's going to be an Oracle SAP type relationship, and it isn't. It's much more a case of you're entirely interchangeable. You don't, when you shop with Airbnb, you don't know who the cleaner is. You don't know who the merchant company that provides the cash is. You don't know who the transfer company. You don't know any of these things. So those are just faceless commodities which can be chopped in and out at will.
I think one of the things, I think it was William who made a comment about generosity, right? And for whatever reason, it's making me think of Ebenezer Scrooge, where he just hoards all his money, right? And this is what we're doing. This is the example you just gave, right? I'm going to buy and buy and buy all of your production until you are fully dependent on me. And then I'm going to run your prices down until you can just survive, right? That's the Ebenezer Scrooge model. I'm going to take all the money and I'm not going to care who you are, what mortgage you have, or you. I'm just going to care that you can't pay it and I'm going to go and collect. But everybody's heard that story, right? Did that work out for Ebenezer Scrooge? No. I mean, financially, I guess, but as a human, no. And at the end, he's switched around to this new version of himself. It's not that he doesn't have any money, but he's added this level of generosity into his ecosystem. So what could it look like if we looked at our ecosystem and said, how can I infuse generosity into this ecosystem for all parties?
Changing tracks a little bit.
Yes.
So if we're referring to an ecosystem that is specifically not a social media platform, like in the case of Airbnb, what does the confluence of an ecosystem and social media look like? What should it look like?
Well, isn't Airbnb a social media platform?
I contend no.
It's full of user-generated content.
Is it?
Yeah. So you mark me and give me a review as a host. I mark you and give you a review as a guest. There are chat rooms about different resorts, sharing of where you can go when you're in this place. You can have one-to-one conversations with other guests and or your host. I think absolutely it's a social media platform. And I
All
think
right,
that
I'll concede that. But
I think that's its strength, isn't it?
I don't know. What I was getting at is, where is Airbnb's place on what we would consider conventional social media platforms? Where should it be? Where should somebody in the Airbnb ecosystem be in Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram? Instagram seems like a brilliant platform for visual media related to the Airbnb ecosystem. What should companies be doing in that regard is what I'm scratching at, I guess.
I mean, all I'm thinking is I don't think there's one thing that every company in the ecosystem should do, because every company in the ecosystem is different, right? Just
Okay.
because, like, you might be a local cleaning company and you don't want to be on social media. You've built all of your business off of referrals, or maybe you've built your entire business off of Airbnb, right? So you don't have to be on conventional social media if that ecosystem fills your boots. It's like the little fish that swim behind the sharks, right? Like the shark eats their food and the little fish get what they need, and that is it. So who am I to judge what that little fish needs? If that little fish wants to be on TikTok, they can be on TikTok. But I don't think there's one right thing for them to do.
But isn't the opportunity here the bringing together of these different ecosystems into one place? So, for all of us, when we part with money, we are risk averse. That's why eBay and Airbnb and TripAdvisor are such powerful platforms, because it helps remove some of your perceived risk and fear around spending the money, because you're buying the promise of something. I'm buying the promise of the fact you're going to send me that book that I've just given you money for, or that your room that I'm going to come and stay in is as you have shown it to be. But these are small closed ecosystems. Even the big ones are small closed ecosystems. But if you merge them together, so that the commoditized elements, the host, the cleaner, the person that does the airport transfers, whatever it may be, are all entirely visible to everybody within the ecosystem, not hidden, then there's nowhere to hide, is there? The biggest fear for anybody that rents a property, as the owner of the property, is that you get that Pacific Heights thing. We've all seen Pacific Heights, where the guy moves in and he basically dismantles the flat with the couple living downstairs, and he takes out the kitchen and smashes everything up, and he's a truly hideous individual. And the nice thing about bringing these ecosystems together is that increasingly there's nowhere for somebody to hide. You are the sum of all of your previous behaviors.
So is this about bringing the customer and the supplier together?
It is, but also all of the elements that you perceive as being the supplier. So, if I'm the cleaner that comes into the apartment after you've stayed in the apartment and it's in a dreadful state, I can photograph that and say, look at this. This is what happened when Tim Hughes 123 went and stayed in this apartment, or whatever the situation is. And that gives everybody complete accountability for their behavior, doesn't it? Everybody has to be accountable. You can't blame it on somebody else. And I think that it also gives the people within that ecosystem enormously more power than they currently have. I want you to use this vendor. I want you to use this merchant. I want you to use this whatever. So all of a sudden, those are not commoditized anymore.
But one of the things that, I mean, if we look at what's happening in the world, we've got a lot of supply chain disruption. And parts where we may have got parts or raw materials from, suddenly we can't get them, either because there's a COVID breakout, or there's a war, or something goes on, and we have to get them from somewhere else. And so we're totally reliant on what I would say a partnership. If I'm a manufacturer, and I need to make something, when I produce my plan to say what I'm going to make this month, I want to make sure that I can get those raw materials and those silicon chips and those bits and pieces to the right place at the right time. And then when I ship it, I want to make sure that I'm moving up the supply chain and I'm shipping it to the right place and the right time and in the right order that the people want it in. There's this interplay and this interrelationship that actually works really well if we can get together and in manufacturing we share our demand plans with our suppliers, because then they actually get to the raw materials to us on time. Some people actually will have raw material stock on site that we can actually then pull from. So it's that interplay is what I see. So there's some things
that was exactly the next question I was going to ask. Is it then a lack of an ecosystem, which has led some organizations to be hit harder by current labor issues or supply chain problems or the economic downturn? And if so, what can they do? Can all businesses build or be part of one?
Or do they want to be? Because it isn't part of the challenge with an ecosystem that you have predetermined or preferential channels for delivering stuff. So, I'm absolutely relying on Tim bringing my shopping to me. And Tim tells me that there's going to be a delay in bringing my shopping to me because of some other thing which is happening in his business world. But if I've got total transparency of where the shopping's coming from and what their stock situation is, I can walk around that roadblock, which happens to be Tim in that particular instance.
Well, I mean, it's an open. It's been reported in the news that production of the Mini has been slowed or halted because there are certain parts made in Ukraine, and obviously that there's a bit of a problem with those. So what do BMW will do? Well, if they'll have a partnership with the people in Ukraine, and Ukraine will may actually say, look, we're going to work on it, and what we will do is that we will subcontract the work to Czechoslovakia. So you're still going to buy it from us, but we're going to move the manufacturing over there. That's where you would have a discussion with a partnership and say, I need to get those parts. How can you help me get them? And it may be that even BMW will pay for the production because there's a requirement for the cash. They put the cash first of all, but that's a meaningful relationship that you would have with an organization. Now BMW can go and suddenly say, well, we're actually going to go and get them from a place in Korea. But what would happen is that there would be an open and honest and adult conversation going on between those suppliers.
But isn't that absolutely highlighting the risk of a single point of failure in any kind of relationship? If you're reliant on a constant stream of raw materials from a source, and your profitability and your production is absolutely reliant on that, and your business is reliant on that, then you shouldn't put all of your eggs in one particular basket. And that's the challenge with most.
But that's a challenge of commerce. That's what's one of the problems that we have at the moment in terms of the macroeconomics, which is that we were bumbling along. We have done for the last 60 years, where everything seemed to be okay. And then what happens is that we all of a sudden a number of things happen. So, for example, COVID. So there was a lot of people got stuff from China, and then all of a sudden we couldn't get the stuff from China because that was shut down. So we moved our manufacturing to Korea, and then they got shut down because of COVID. So we moved it to Singapore, then they got shut down. So there's always things that can have an impact, and that's why organizations have to be fleet of foot in terms of that, but having those partnerships and having those adult discussions, and maybe saying to the people, the Ukraine people, just look, we can't do this, and can you help us? And BMW putting the money up, and I'm just giving you examples of conversations that could take place that would actually enable you to make sure that you don't have those problems, and the ecosystem and those partnerships would work for you.
I think it all comes back to intention, right? Like, is my intention to get the product from the lowest cost provider as fast as possible? Is my intention to have a trustworthy source that's always going to be available?
And it's not. And I agree with you, Tracy. Which is not normal. It's not it's not always the lowest price.
Mhm.
I
Well,
mean,
because this is my husband works in supply chain,
yeah,
so it's very relevant for his work, right? And one of the challenges that they have is that when you treat the truck drivers like interchangeable batteries, and then all of a sudden the truck drivers have all of the power because there's nobody to ship anything, all of a sudden your prices go up because you didn't bother to create a relationship with them in the first place. You treated them like a battery, and now they're treating you the same, right?
and we have this situation. I mean, Will makes a great point about the silicon. You know, we already, there's a situation where we may have a war with China, and we're already seeing, companies have pulled out of Russia, and we're already seeing companies pulling out of China without there being a "you must pull out" situation. So there's this disruption going on across the whole of the supply chain, in terms of the way things are happening. And Will makes a great point about silicon chips in Taiwan.
Mm.
So, according to a post on ecosystems by Ernst and Young, and I'll put the link in the chat, they say every business ecosystem has participants, and at least one member acts as the orchestrator of the participants. Is this orchestrator then, by default, the leading technical and commercial influencer in your industry?
I don't know if by default they are.
Often they
I
are,
think,
aren't they?
well, I think it depends on what you mean by influence, right? Because we're talking a lot about the commerce and the control. So, like, whoever controls Airbnb controls the ecosystem. So if they're like, oh, okay, we're not gonna partner with any of the cleaning companies that we've partnered with, or we're getting all new cleaning companies, then it doesn't really matter what the cleaning companies say. It's they're making that decision. Now, I don't know. I guess I just see a split between like the control and the influence, right? Because if I like, sure, then you're saying I can't do business with Airbnb anymore. That influences my business in a negative way or a positive way. But as a human, how is that? Is it a dictator? I mean,
One of
I'm
the
just not interested in participating in a dictatorship. So
one
it's also
one of
why
the
I don't buy from Amazon.
one of the powerful things about social media is the democratization of it. What it's done is it's helped to actually make more and more and more people the same. The fact, I can go to a CEO on LinkedIn and have a conversation with them. Little old me, being able to do that just shows how democratized the ability on social media is. And I think what the other thing is, that great thing about social media is the Matt Pybus, who works for Crux, is talking a lot about the fact that you have this David and Goliath situation. As a small business, you can actually punch above your weight on social media and be bigger than the people that have got thousands or millions of dollars to spend on marketing. And that's where you can use that, or use your influence and control being two different things. I can be a small business with little control, but I can have a lot of influence as long as I'm willing to do the right things.
So I wanted to pick up. We've a couple of times alluded to the fact that, say, the merchant account providers or the cleaning companies are part of the Airbnb ecosystem, and we've implied that they actually go through Airbnb to accomplish their goals. That's not necessarily the case. The cleaning companies are reliant on the Airbnb ecosystem because they're cleaning for the apartment owners, but they're not necessarily put the apartment owners and the cleaning companies have not necessarily been put together by Airbnb doing anything overtly. Just the mere existence of Airbnb creates the demand for somebody to clean my apartments once they've been rented out. I may go and find that person on my own. That cleaning company that I find is then part of this ecosystem, whether they even know Airbnb exists. So there's a lot of things going on in an ecosystem that do not necessarily require a particular participant to even be aware that they're part of that ecosystem. That orchestrator, however, that center of the ecosystem, certainly knows about themselves and all of the various parts and seems to have great influence over all of them. If Airbnb ceased to exist tomorrow for whatever reason, that small cleaning company that Tracy alluded to, that wants no part of social, is just happy cleaning the Airbnb apartments, they're SOL at this point. They now have to figure out, well, what's the next thing? Where can I clean next? And so on. So that orchestrator has a lot of influence over them indirectly. It seems the orchestrator effectively dictates the terms of who is a part of the ecosystem and how it operates. Must you own your own platform to do this? Or can you leverage other platforms and still be an orchestrator? Sorry. I told you I've been working on this all week.
That's brilliant, but isn't, and you use the term control, isn't the challenge always that when you are reliant on a third party, and I don't mean suppliers or even customers, but when your business hinges on somebody else providing, a coherent service, that's a massive risk to any organization. So you can always get another cleaning company, you can always get another customer, theoretically. You can always do these things because there are lots of those. The global Airbnb system has lots of cleaning companies that work around the world, and it has lots of customers that buy around the world. But if it's using the Facebook platform, let's say, for this, then Facebook has the ability to switch them on and off at will. And for any business to be reliant on another party is really dangerous. So yes, I think they have to control that part of the ecosystem. They have to be able to shape it in their own image and refine it to the point that it does what they need to do. And that does give them huge power. Conversely, all of those little people that have no power, social provides them with huge power. And in the case of cleaning companies, that's like, we're not going to do any cleaning, so they all go on strike. So Airbnb owners don't get their apartments cleaned. Or customers, they will leave bad reviews. So people don't go and shop at this company or this ecosystem anymore. And the danger here is one of balance, isn't it? Like, I want to sell you more and more and more of my product, so I've got a single customer because that's easier for me to administer. But with that comes the risk that I'll become entirely reliant on you and you'll drive my prices down. And actually, Tim said earlier on about it being having grown-up conversations. Actually, you need to have decent conversations and you need to be a decent, fair individual, don't you, for this kind of distributed business to work? Because without that, when everybody is trying to get the lowest price or get one over, that's when the problems occur.
I think Martin makes a great point about who owns the customer.
Yeah.
Like in this scenario, people are buying Airbnb, right? Like that's the brand that they're buying. So from Airbnb's, the distributor's perspective, right? Like, I want to choose owners who have a certain amount of pride in their property because I want people to trust my brand. I want to partner with cleaning services. I want to partner with everybody throughout the ecosystem that builds trust in my brand. And if I have somebody who doesn't build trust in my brand, I mean, like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't partner with people who don't help me build trust in my brand, right? So at the end of the day, if I'm a cleaner, I would say yes. I'm gonna get signed up with Airbnb because Airbnb is a trusted brand, and I am a trusted part of the ecosystem for that brand. But at the end of the day, Airbnb could be like, you know what? we had you signed up as a cleaner, and every single time you clean, there's bad reviews about how clean the place is. We can't be partnered with you, because that's not a good reflection of our brand. And so I think if you're a small business who's looking at building this right now, right? Like, you're not Airbnb, you don't have this, although we all have ecosystems. What is that public brand that you want people to know, that you want people to trust, that you want people to feel? What do you want them to feel about that? And how does your ecosystem contribute to that? And I dare say that if they're not contributing to that, then they are not a worthy part of your ecosystem.
And I think that's, if you think about a brand, you can't get a bigger brand than BMW or Mini. And when you go and buy a Mini and they say there's a 12-month waiting list, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a conversation going all the way down from sales, all the way down the supply chain, saying, what can we do to make sure that we're going to make that that wait shorter? And that may be down to discussions about, we're going to move the manufacturing from Ukraine to Czechoslovakia, or whatever it is. And that's all part of the moving parts that you would expect to have in an organization like that.
And there's also people who are willing to wait for that, right? There's people like, yep, I want a Mini, and I will wait to get one.
Well, yeah, with a Mini, there's one on the forecourt and it's green. Or if you want the blue one, it's 12 months. What do you want? And so, there can be those discussions, but there will be discussions going on down through the supply chain, especially as we've got so much macroeconomic disruption at the moment, that's going to have an impact to everybody. So much so, what it's going to do is, we saw even before COVID, manufacturing being pulled from China and back into the US or to Mexico, or whatever, and we're seeing that here in the UK and across in Europe.
All right.
Well done, Rob.
Well, that
you got any more for us?
If I did, we wouldn't have time for it anyway. We're about at the top of the hour. I wanted to thank, of course, the participants on the panel, but I want to thank everyone who has been discussing this with us in the chat and discussing it amongst themselves in the chat as well. That's when we know we've had an effective session. When the conversations that we try and spark lead to completely separate conversations between the outside participants. So, William, Andrew, Martin, Zahid, who else did we see? I want to make sure that we're calling them all out, saying
Andrew,
thank you.
Will, Zahid,
Susan was in there.
Lenwood.
Yes, Lenwood. Sorry we missed you. This has been another episode of the DD. Now that you're in the know, you know. We look forward to speaking with you again next week. I think Tracy's got the helm next week. Is that right? Any hints? Any ideas? Any topics?
If you guys wanted to check out the article I wrote this past week on LinkedIn, it will give you some very good advice of our topic for next weekend. It's gonna be fun because it's all about insanity. We're gonna stop the insanity.
We're there.
You're the right group.
We're maybe going to contribute to the insanity, but also help eliminate some insanity.
It's not about pizza, because you wrote one about pizza.
I did write one about pizza, and maybe we'll talk about pizza, but we're going to talk about marketing insanity, you guys. What do we do in marketing that is actually insane, and we should stop doing it? So awesome. Come, invite your friends, come and ask your questions about
bring your list.
Doing all of these things.
I think we're going to need longer than an hour, aren't we?
We're going to need a bigger show.
I love to open a good can of worms. So come with your, why do we do this in marketing? And we'll talk about it.
Well, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. That was a really good session, Rob. Well done.